Good morning, it's Dr. Jonathan Ellerby and the Althea Center, and we are welcoming you to another spectacular live Sunday gathering. Although I do hope that lots of people will either watch this again or at a later date. So whoever you are, whenever you are, and wherever you are, welcome, welcome, welcome. Today we have an incredible plan for you, for us, as tomorrow, as tomorrow is Martin Luther King Day here in the United States. And at Althea, this was always a very special time for us to celebrate and to examine the topic of diversity, the challenges, the paths, the champions, the leaders, and of course, the incredible legacy of Dr. King. So when we would gather in person, we would have incredible tribute songs and often incredible readings. But this year, of course, we're online, so we can't really do that stuff quite the same. And what I thought is that given the state of the world that we're facing, and particularly the state of things here in the United States, it seemed to me more important that we acknowledge the need to celebrate progress. We acknowledge the significant world-changing legacy of Dr. King, but really in honor of what he stood for, that we take today to further the dialogue, to learn and explore and question how we can be a part of this new consciousness, of this healing, and of this social development that so many of us long for. Having said that, in a little while, I will be introducing you to my guest for today, the absolutely fantastic, brilliant, witty, thoughtful, clever, funny, and incredibly smart Dr. Han Ren, who is a licensed psychologist and specializes in, among other things, understanding cultural psychology and the dynamics of race in psychology, healing, and society. So it's going to be good. Now, as you know, we got to get through some announcements before we get into that really good stuff. So let me do that first. So, what do we have to say? Always, if you're ever in doubt of something to do or what's going on or something you heard about, please check out our Althea website, and you'll look under classes or events, and you will see everything coming up and how you can sign up for it. Now, every Thursday, once again, every Thursday, everyone in the whole world is invited to join us at 11 a.m. Mountain Time and or 7 p.m. Mountain Time for community connections. And each time is an hour and a half of exploring an important topic that is meaningful, that is current, that is impacting our spiritual, personal, even social lives. So you're all welcome. There's no charge. Of course, we love donations, but everyone's welcome to join as our guests. Thursdays, that's 11 a.m. or 7 p.m. I facilitate it with Joni Klieger. I really do the morning one, and she really does the night one, but they're both fantastic. You can even go to both of them, because I don't think you should miss Joni's. It's usually more interesting than mine, to be honest. Let's continue. January the 22nd, that's this Friday, actually, I am starting a new special small group series, or maybe there'll be a big group if lots of people sign up. It's called Spiritual Integration. It's going to be 6 weeks long. It's 2 hours per week live. So we'll have live group discussions and teachings. And then every week, you're going to have 30 minutes of spiritual practice homework a day. Every week, you will have a new assignment. 30 minutes every day, a new assignment. That means 6 different practices over 6 weeks, 30 minutes per day. Now, you don't have to do it if you're busy or you don't want to do things, you don't like being told what to do. God forbid we should make any sacrifice for our personal growth. But seriously, it's going to be rich, it's going to be dynamic, and if you choose to do everything that's a part of the program, I think you'll get a lot out of it. You'll enjoy the community, and I think there's lots to experience and lots to learn. So again, that's spiritual integration. It starts Friday, January 22nd, unless our signups aren't strong, because we've only advertised this for a week. Then we'll just start the following Friday. Wednesday, January 27th, we have Elise Lasco returning, offering another 1 hour live, distant, online energy healing session. She combines pranic and Reiki energy healing along with her own intuitive work. It's really quite fantastic. $15 to participate. Excuse me. Wednesday, February 3rd, Mariposa does their first Wednesday diversity dialogue on Zoom. And this is another envisioning and planning possible programming for 2021. It's a great time to learn more about Mariposa. It's also a great time to give your input. The last thing I want you to know is that at 11:30 today, we will switch into the Zoom classroom. So if you want to have some dialogue with people that have been on this in this gathering with you, if you want to hear a little more from me about what our guest has shared and the dialogue that we've had, then join us for a 30-minute touch base from 11:30 to 12. We'll have some time just to reflect, to talk, and connect. I'm probably going to go over these at the end to remind you, but again, thank you for being here. Thank you for attending. Thank you for your energy. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your donations. We want to start 2021 strong. So if you want, you can sign up and be an evergreen donor and just have a regular amount going every month. Or you can follow the link that we will provide at the beginning and end of this gathering and make a donation so we can continue to have amazing people like Dr. Han come to our community, and we can continue to explore what it means to live an awakened life. So on that note, let's take a few minutes to get centered, to get settled, and then get into our conversation. I could not be more excited. I know, I say that a lot, don't I? I'm very excitable. But I think this is a really important topic, and I'm really glad you're here. And if there's anyone you know that you think wants another lens, another look, another understanding of race and culture and psychology, text them right now, call them, email, tell them to tune in, because it's going to be good. All right. I would like to invite you now to get settled. So that means sit comfortably but alert. Let your eyes close. And just for a minute, just sort of let go of everything and anything that you might have to do or be. Let's start by taking a big breath in through the nose, big inhale. Hold it a moment. Notice where you're feeling tension or tightness and then let it go. Breathe it out long and slowly. Feel your body soften. Feel yourself becoming more aware of the stillness and the silence in the room, continuing with your eyes closed. Another big exaggerated breath in. Hold it a moment. Notice busyness of mind, distraction, physical tension, and then let it go. Long exhale. Really concentrate on the release. Feel yourself becoming more aware of the quietness that's around you and within you. Feel yourself becoming more and more aware of the stillness and the silence that is available to each and all of us, no matter where we are, who we are, how we are. And from that stillness, may we feel, may we affirm, may we remember our togetherness. That despite all difference, when our eyes are closed and our hearts are open, and we listen into the stillness, we feel the deep unity of all life. We remember the affirmation that binds our community, that has brought us together for over 130 years, affirming all paths to unity, all paths to oneness, each in our own way, but together as one. And if you remember, you can share this timeless affirmation. God is all, both invisible and visible. One presence, one mind, one power is all. This one that is all is perfect life, perfect love, and perfect substance. We are individualized expressions of God and are ever one with this perfect life, perfect love, and perfect substance. As a bit of an alternative to starting with a prayer today, I'd like to share a couple of readings and then bring in our guest. Mary de la Vallée, a poet and activist from the Gaia Institute, once wrote, "Let us understand the gravity of our situation. Let us understand that our only redemption is love. Love for a small, endangered planet on which we are utterly dependent. Only love can transform us from plunderers and savagers into earthkeepers and peacemakers. Only love can show us the integrity and rights of all other beings. Only love can open our eyes to the truth and beauty that surrounds us. Only love can teach us the humility we need to live on earth, and only love can now save us from extinction." In this spirit, I want to share a beautiful quotation by Martin Luther King, good Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. And in fact, it's actually two that I've kind of blended into one, but very relevant for the days that we are facing here. The limitation of riots, moral questions aside, is that they cannot win, and their participants know it. Hence, rioting is not revolutionary, but reactionary, because it invites defeat. It involves an emotional catharsis, but it must be followed by a sense of futility. We must develop and maintain the capacity to forgive. He, she, who is devoid of the power to forgive is devoid of the power to love. There is some good in the worst of us and some evil in the best of us. When we discover this, we are less prone to hate our enemies. I believe that unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final word in reality. That is why right, temporarily defeated, is stronger than evil triumphant. And so, we are going to try something super new today, because I am going to use a new Facebook feature, and I'm going to go looking for my guest. Oh, I don't see her. Well, we practiced this. Hang on. So we're going to do a split screen, so that's why you got my face up close. And there we go. Oh, shucks. There we go. There we go. Just a little glitch, folks. Hey. Hey.
Hi.
How are you this morning?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm so excited. I don't know if you got to hear my early raving about you and your background?
I watched like
Hopefully
maybe
not.
10 minutes ago. I might have missed that one, but
Well, I'm glad. It would have been a bit embarrassing. So, first of all, I'm going to say to the people that have been listening and watching, if there's anything glitchy, I'm going to ask them to just let us know in the feed.
okay.
Because I do notice that when we do the Facebook split screen, I get some audio feedback, but you don't hear it.
It sounds a little robotic at times, but it's manageable.
Okay, but you sound great. So let's see what other people have to say. So a couple of notes before we get rolling, and this is more for the people listening. I don't mind letting you all know that I met Dr. Hahn through TikTok. And, you know, TikTok, if you don't know what it is, it's probably because you don't understand it. But it's so much more than what you think. It's really quite remarkable. I mean, my best recipes are coming from TikTok. Some of my best guidance for a good life is now coming from people like Dr. Hahn. And amazingly, when there's major events unfolding, have you noticed that? You get feeds from what is literally happening as it's happening. It's crazy. But I'm saying all this because you've got to, if you have it, you've got to follow her. You are so friggin' smart when it comes to making our psychological complexity simple and actionable.
Thank you.
Really?
Thank you.
Yeah, you're like
Oh
my
my
hero. Yeah, it's true. It's really hard to do what you do, and you do it so well. 60 seconds, and you're explaining trauma reactions, or managing stress, or how to cope with COVID lockdowns. Like I'm giving up, right? My TikTok account is just going to say, follow Dr. Han Ren. I think that's perfect. Sound is choppy, it says. Sounds like we're underwater.
Yeah,
What?
there's a lot of people send us feedback and robotic sounds. It sounds okay to me, but
Yeah, you sound good to me. I think I'm the one who doesn't sound good. Well, what do you think we should do? Is there any solution? Should we I can't leave and come back because I'll shut everyone off. Do you want to leave and come back?
I don't know if I'm sounding choppy or if it's just you. Audience,
Audience?
I don't know.
Audience?
I mean, you sound okay to me, and I sound okay to me, so I don't know.
Only
Okay.
me. Okay. Well, some people say the background is choppy, but we sound good.
Oh.
This is ridiculous. you ask 53 people for opinion, you get 53 answers. It's not my microphone because I used it when there was no noise. It's background noise. Yes. Now someone's suggesting we log off and back on, but we'll lose probably most of our people. Well, here's the deal. You are more clear than me. Oh, someone's saying mute yourself. Dan, you're so smart, Dr. Dan. Dr. Dan's out there. I can't really mute myself. Can I? No. I think we should just start. Oh, it's pretty distracting. What is this? What is this? It's I can take my microphone off, but we did this test today, and Facebook is prone to this no matter what. Is that a little better? Not for me. Yeah, it's just the split screen. I don't know that we should spend 20 minutes talking about this. Shall we forge ahead?
Sure. Sounds good to me.
Okay.
Like
So
one problem. It's just background noise. Got to pick out the signal from the noise, wherever we are.
It's literally what we're all dealing with. So I want to just dive in, if it's okay, because most people got to hear me talk about your background, and now everyone's going to follow you on Instagram and TikTok. But the first question I wanted to ask you is, when did you personally start becoming aware of what I would call cultural psychology? And what I mean by that is not the discipline of cultural psychology, but the fact that different cultures actually seem to have different psychologies, that we can't apply the same psychological theory to everyone everywhere.
I think it's been an ongoing growth process, just kind of related to my own racial identity development. I was born in China, so I grew up with the framework of like, I'm a Chinese person. And then just through my upbringing in, like as a third culture kid, when I got to college, I was like, no, I have nothing to do with my Chinese roots, and I just want to be American, whatever that means. And it wasn't probably until after college that I started to really recognize that, not only are cultural components really relevant to my personal life, but it's relevant to everybody's lives everywhere you go. And so I started being more aware of it in the work that I did. I was a special education teacher for a few years. And then once I entered grad school, my cohort was fairly diverse, but the personnel, were the faculty, were all pretty white. Just realizing like a lot of the things that I was learning ignored a big part of people's existence. And it was always a dream of mine to really center my work around people of color and Asian Americans in particular. But it wasn't until after I started my own practice that I got to actually like learn as I went to see what that looked like. And I started my practice right around the beginning of 2017. So it was great timing in terms of bringing a lot of like underground, I don't want to say underground, but like repressed cultural, racial traumas to light, post-Trump's election. And that's when I was like, oh, this is really relevant and necessary. And I started doing a lot of my own learning, both, reading and learning from others, but also experientially as I was trying to counsel people and be an admin for a Facebook group of therapists, where there's a lot of white fragility showing up.
So I'm going to jump in, and I'm going to do that a lot because I want to hear as much as possible. As that unfolded for you, what was more pronounced, that you began to sense that different ethnic upbringings created distinct culturally rooted psychologies, or the division between what we might call white and non-white psychology? Do you know what I'm saying? Was it more that you started to, as you got deeper into this, did it become more apparent that really each culture, language, nation has its own culture, or was the more dramatic awareness the division between people of color and what we might just call white folks?
Yeah, I mean, I would say probably more white versus non-white people. I mean, of course, there's, no culture is a monolith, and there's a ton of variability across cultures in, BIPOC communities. But the more discernible division, I would say, is really white supremacy culture, individualism, the idea of sense of urgency, perfectionism, hierarchy, paternalism, all of these like elements that we kind of see as like rooted in societal expectations, were not jiving well with a lot of BIPOC people's experiences, and they were just feeling really missed by how psychology and therapy was applicable to their lives and how they could, work to heal themselves using Western ideas of psychological wellness.
Okay, so you just hit on something really big. And I told you I'm very casual.
Yeah.
I have a possible proposal, and I need cooperation for this. I'm hearing the feedback. I can see on your face you're hearing some feedback, and people are saying it's out of sync. We could very quickly switch to Zoom.
Okay.
Because I can't improve the Facebook platform.
I can't do it either.
So what we can do is
God. Like that comment. That sounds pretty bad.
So I'm going to ask Susan to text me a meeting ID. In fact, I have one. It's going to be the one for our group later. I'm going to text it to you, Han. And let's just go right over there. Susan's going to join us, and she'll post this feed live to Facebook. So everyone who's listening, hang on. We expect 54 viewers in 60 seconds. You ready?
All right, I'm ready.
I'm gonna send you the link. All righty then, it's Dr. Jonathan and the Althea Center, and this is actually the continuation of a dialogue that I started just 15 minutes ago with Dr. Han Ren, and we had problems with our Facebook split screen, but I'd kind of like to manage this as though we were, starting fresh, because this video will be recorded, it will be kept, and it will go online. So for those of you that are just tuning in, well, Dr. Han Ren, if you don't know, is one of my new favorite talents on TikTok. She is an extraordinarily talented licensed psychologist who helps people understand the complexities of the human mind and emotion in a complex world, in a complicated time, but in a way that is simple and clear and remarkably easy to understand. Now, one of her specializations is also in what you might call the area or the field of what I consider the psychology of race, the psychology of culture. How do different cultures have different psychologies? And what is the role of psychology in the racial dynamics of a country, particularly like the United States? So when we last left off, I'd asked Dr. Han when she started to become aware that different cultures and communities, different ethnicities, had a different psychology. And she shared that it was a part of her experience growing up first in China and then moving to the United States, and essentially what I would call becoming bicultural. And as she moved into grad school, taking a deeper look at how those dynamics affected the life of herself, her classmates, her colleagues, and so on. But where we came to is a really, really important place to pick up. What I heard was that more significant than the differences between cultures, let's say Chinese versus Korean versus Israeli versus Senegalese, was the dramatic difference between what some might call the dominant white culture and the cultures of people of color. And so you used a word, white supremacy. And you can hear me okay, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, I can't, on my screen, I can't actually see you, but I'm gonna, there we go. So you use the word white supremacy, and what caught my attention was that conventionally most of us think of white supremacy as a very hateful, caustic movement that is about white people obliterating non-white people or controlling them to an extreme. But I sensed a nuance that is not what you were really talking about.
not at
You
all.
were just saying the fact that white consciousness dominates. Could you say more about how you understand this phrase and the differentiation between how you're using it and how people kind of compartmentalize white supremacy as just those crazy people over there, as opposed to
Yeah.
other
Yeah,
people
so
who
I
are?
mean, it's it's rooted in critical race theory, and I'm not talking about neo-Nazis and the KKK. I would really consider those like white extremists or insurrectionists, maybe.
Right.
But when I talk about white supremacy and especially white supremacy cultural values, I mean the idea that the white body is the default, it's the norm, it is the expectation. It is, when we look at like psychological studies in peer-reviewed journals, if it's on white people as the subjects, they don't say on white Americans, they just say like on people. And then when
Right.
they say like, oh, it's on in Eastern cultures or Latinx communities, they specifically name
Right.
this cultural group. So it permeates globally that the white experience of the global north is the default. And that's what I mean by white supremacy. And then along with that are a set of cultural values that we really expect to be, kind of like just like water, right? So societally deemed norms of like, well, of course you would do these things. And those are kind of rooted in individualism, achievement, capitalism, and they're very much how our corporations or organizations are run.
So say a little more about what white culture is in your experience or in your studies, because I've heard you reference certain words,
Yeah.
perfectionism and so on. And what I'd love to hear more about, well, I'd love to hear you articulate what that white culture is a little more, because see, for people that are in it,
Mm-hmm.
and frankly, even regardless of their race, if they have absorbed it
Yeah.
and identified with it, then they can't really see it.
Yeah.
And
And so, I would say that it's not white culture, it's white supremacy culture. So I mean, I would say like, I don't know, when you think of like white culture, it's like, oh, apple pie and hot dogs and baseball and all those things that like, make America great. So I don't think of it, that's more like, I don't know, maybe pop culture, I guess. When I say about like white supremacy cultural values, these are expectations that govern one's like movement through life. And so some examples are perfectionism. People would rather be silent and to get it wrong. So that just keeps people from, doing the messy work of unraveling, examining what white supremacy culture looks like within themselves, internalized, and like within the way that they operate in the world. Another example is sense of urgency. Your boss says, I need this by Friday, and I need it, or like, I need this yesterday. Everything has a sense of urgency, which then, you overlook nuance, you overlook process when you are so just outcomes deadline driven. Another idea is paternalism, that like the people at the top who have the power get to determine what's best for the people at the bottom, and without that lived experience. And you look at any sort of organization, and that's definitely the case of leadership determines what the day-to-day people get. There's a whole list of these cultural values. But I'm learning, what we consider is like just like normal like achievement are very much rooted in this set of white supremacy cultural values.
so let's continue with that a little bit, because I've I've had the personal experience, you and I've talked about this, of being immersed in non-white cultures a lot in my life, where I'm the odd one out.
Mm-hmm.
And I know the feeling of being in another culture where my way of doing things ain't happening.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not that it's a mess or they're wrong. No, they're all jiving to the same program. I'm just trying to like figure out why didn't it happen the way I thought it was going to happen. But not a lot of people that identify as white, or look white, have that experience. And many would respond to what you're saying, I think, defensively and say, wait a second, that sounds like a cop-out. You're saying not answering my email is a cultural value, or taking a long time to reply to a text, or agreeing to a meeting time or a drop-off time, but not honoring it, parking your car facing the wrong direction. I don't know, that's more of my personal example of how I break culture. But, that these things are just cultural excuses for not being organized, responsible people.
Mhm.
So what do you say to that? Because on the other side is are other coherent systems that work very well without the intrusion of the white evaluation. Isn't that right?
Yeah, I mean, I think, using, I mean, it's reductionistic to say like, oh, I'm just going to be late because my cultural values don't align to this, versus like examining how time functions more broadly in other systems. Like if you look at, Latinx cultures, it's a societal expectations, the way that they move through life, pace of life is not urgent. It's not, like, so if something starts at 3 a.m., people are going to trickle in around 3:15. Like, it's just, it becomes more of a guideline. And so, I mean, when I talk about these cultural values, none of them, you can't really use each of these as like, oh, this is my excuse for not adhering to these guidelines.
Right.
But, when you kind of like even zoom out a bit more, this idea of like objectivity, like, is anything truly objective? I mean, the scientific process, I love it. I have a PhD, I'm a scientist, like, but I think of that as just, it can be very limiting if that's all we are adherent to. Or the idea of linearity in storytelling and experiences, that things happen in a linear way. Like, people get so frustrated when they are doing their own treatment, when they're going through like psychological healing, because they're like, I was better last week, how do I get back to that? But it's like, we don't function as linear beings. And so a lot of these are based on these cultural values.
So I want to pick up on that a little bit. And one thing that might be interesting for a lot of the people listening is that for people who didn't primarily identify with the distinction you're talking about, maybe they grew up in sort of white culture. What I do find, though, is that broadly speaking, people who immerse themselves in what we call modern spirituality often experience themselves a kind of cultural transition in their own lives. They become more process oriented. They become more listeners than knowers, right? They become more collaborators than fixers. And then what I hear from them is that they struggle, because as they evolve to a more whole or dynamic and diverse sort of psychology, they feel like they don't fit in. They feel like different from their families. They feel like what they're trying to achieve internally is being combated externally. Now, that's just the story of someone who grew up with white supremacy values and then realized their limits. Can you speak to what you hear and see and are exposed to in the lived experience of people who spend their whole lives feeling cultural incongruence or disconnect?
Yeah,
For
I mean,
example,
you mean like for like BIPOC population?
yeah. So when I mean, I don't know how to say it, but just to be kind of coarse about it. So when white folks are watching the news or see demonstrations, I don't think the depth of cultural difference or lived experience, uh, I think it barely registers.
Yeah.
And so people say things like, I don't see color, which is actually kind of, I think, offensive to
Very
most
racist
people of
thing.
color,
Yeah.
right? Like, oh, we're all the same. So can you speak, like, how different is the lived experience for people who are forced to live biculturally versus people who get the privilege of the white supremacist value?
Yeah, I mean, when people are trying to integrate their newfound like spiritual identities into like mainstream culture, like that is a flavor of what most people of color are trying to navigate. And this idea of belonging, or one foot in both worlds and belonging to neither, trying to find, the difference between fitting in somewhere versus belonging somewhere. Having to really get good at code switching. That's something that we experience on a day-to-day basis, and I don't even say that from like a universal experience, because I think there's a lot of people of color who have this internalized white supremacy, who are really, really good at assimilation to the point where they forget or forego these roots, and it's comfortable. It's easier to then say like, I am part of this dominant culture. But I think like, people and communities, when you are really diving into what, like experiencing your own identity in this cultural context, and like going through the nuance of it, you find the pull is still there.
So here's kind of a provocative little question.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm, my job's just to ask dumbass questions so that everyone can learn something, right?
Yeah.
So let's imagine someone is born, a person of color is born into a community of white supremacist values or white supremacy values, and they absorb them from day one.
Mm-hmm.
If that's how they identify and that's how they were acculturated,
Mm-hmm.
do they necessarily experience dissonance or division in themselves? Or
are you talking about like a person of color or a white person who's born into this?
Oh, no. So a person of color born into the white culture,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
and they've internalized it from day one,
Yeah.
Is there something innate, however you want to define that, whether it's the way they're treated by others or something they feel in themselves, is there something innate that's always going to bring up that sense of division? Or is
I mean, I don't think necessarily, right? Because there are a lot of people who are people of color who really support the current administration.
Yeah.
I mean, or just like even like white supremacy as its most extreme. I mean, I'm thinking of like Tila Tequila, for example, who is a woman, who's experienced a lot of trauma, but she like really identifies as a neo-Nazi. And I mean, people who are
She does?
She does, yeah. I mean, I don't know. That kind of dates myself because she was like this reality star, when I was growing up, and she's a Filipino woman, but like she has really aligned with the alt-right. And I think of that as like, those who were not born into this and then choose it as kind of aligning with the aggressor, because that is the the faction with more power, with more capital. Like, why wouldn't you want to be part of that? You have more agency, and you have more power. Versus people who were born into it. I think at a certain point there is, I mean, not for everyone, but for a lot of them, like there's a reckoning of like, oh, hey, like I can speak this and I can pass as this. And I think it's even more, it can be both more like uncomfortable, but also like easily ignored if you're a white passing person of color. Because you can fit in and assimilate, but then seeing, what's going on in the political spectrum and in the news and the rhetoric that we are really immersed in right now, it's really hard to ignore that. But people either choose to dive into that, or they choose to align even further with what's comfortable and familiar, and that's where the polarization is happening, I think.
So quickly, on a lighter note, do you know Keenan and Peele?
Yeah. Key and Peele, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Is it Kia Peele?
Key and Peele, they're two people.
Yeah, the two guys. If anyone looks them up, it's actually the foundation of their humor
Mm-hmm.
is exploring biraciality. There's all kinds of amazing examples that are actually insightful, but they play it out in a funny way. Now, to use that as a transition point, because our time is whipping by,
Mm-hmm.
let's get into some stuff that's not quite so funny. You and I had a brief talk the other day, and I sensed you were about to say something, and I said, wait, save it for Sunday. And the conversation was about how do we find a path forward in this country with the resurgence of white extremism, to be more specific, and the kind of confused white middle that doesn't identify with that, wants to align with people of color and ensure, equality and opportunity across the board, but mixed in with all this is the fact that there are fundamentally different ways of pursuing future outcomes, healing, and change. So, what do you see as the big hurdles and opportunities when it comes to race relations in this country?
Oh, that's such a big question.
Yeah.
I think I can only really tap the tip of the iceberg here with some
what
thoughts.
If you start with, so let me make it smaller for you. Can you address that by starting off by talking about collectivism versus individualism?
Sure, yeah. I see this at work when, I think it's like the progressive liberal white person who are like, oh, pearl clutching, and this is not me. This is not America. And that, as rooted in good intent and this oh my gosh, something has to change. That is a great example of white exceptionalism. I am separate from this. I don't identify as this. This is not me. But I think for us to really be able to collectively move forward, we have to see them in ourselves and ourselves in them, because that is that's the water. That's the capitalist ideas. And then, we are part of this bigger picture. And I say we because I'm part of it too, because I have a lot of privilege of living a white adjacent life. I've had privilege of being white, having a lot of the same opportunities as white people. Not to say that Asian Americans don't go through their own very specific types of racism and othering, but as an Asian person, my experience is different than a Black person or an Indigenous person in this country. And I think it's really easy for me to be like, well, I'm not white, I don't have to reckon with this, but I do, and I have to reckon with it with my people too, because of the silence of a lot of Asian Americans and the white exceptionalism that we are also part of. And so I think of sitting with the discomfort of we are all part of this and we're all complicit in it. And this is the system. If you really go through the history of, policing and, the way that our structures are built, the system is working as it should when these insurrectionists are able to do this and not being taken seriously and having selfies taken, all of this. And so when we think about how do we move forward, it's this uncomfortable dismantling of internalized white supremacy and finding ways that we should have internalized racial superiority and racial inferiority in the ways that we interact with the people in our world, in the ways that we interpret media, the ideas of when we see people do different things, when we pop up wow, that person's very articulate. You're like, why? Is it because they're Black? Why are you thinking that? These automatic thoughts that we are just flooded with, and nobody is immune to it. And it's not, it comes with shame to oh yeah, I had that thought. But until we can look at the shame and integrate these shadow parts of our identity and ourselves, we can't really move forward as a collective.
Awesome. Now let's go further into so we have to, all parties involved. It's you mentioned shadow work. I mean, it's really about being honest and saying, hey, what we have all participated in, what we have all enjoyed privileges from, and so on. But when we look at evolution as a society and we start going into the next step, is there a built-in trap when it comes to wanting to advance collectivist cultures in an individualistic society? I mean, isn't there some sort of a weird paradox that we haven't named yet, which is
The
that we're
dialectics, right? It's the tension of this, like the opposing truths that are both simultaneously true. Like, if you want to be anti-racist, you have to be anti-capitalist to some degree, because racism is based in capitalism. And yet we live and survive and thrive in capitalist societies, and we have to commodify our skills and what we have in order to thrive in this. And it's the same with all of this is there's very much a dialectic tension to it.
and would you say, I mean, and I know this is like, and I don't mind, we can be provocative and you can say extreme things. Would you say that socialism is also a more collectivist value? I mean, and when I say socialism, you have to understand I'm Canadian. So the things that Americans are afraid of as socialism, I mean, I find laughable. But the idea that people should be cared for, that people shouldn't go hungry, that single parents should be supported, all these kinds of things that some people in this country are very much against, right? It should be every person lives and dies by their own merit. Do you think some of these collectivist versus individualist cultural differences would be felt at the highest levels of politics as well?
Sure, yeah, but then you're also kind of like going against like human nature too, right? When you get to that point, it's like, Animal Farm, right? Like, and we're all equal, but some people are more equal than others. Like, there's this human nature pull towards power and like abuse of power. So I mean, I think of it as like game theory really applies here. Like, if we all do the right thing, then we all benefit. But if some people don't do the right thing, then at a certain point it becomes like every man for themselves. And that inherently involves winners and losers. And I mean, even looking at something as simple as like masking, I mean, that's just become such a political thing. Like, if we all did it, it'd be fine. But then, like, when some are doing it and some are not doing it, we have to not only consider like the greater good, but like what's going to benefit ourselves, or like, vaccine distribution, or, all of these different issues that we are, like reckoning with in terms of our individual choices and how that benefits us and our people versus the greater good. Great game theory, I think, really much applies here.
Now, I don't want to be guilty of, romanticizing one side of our conversation versus another, because I think every side has merit and every side has deficit, however you want to put it. But would you speak briefly to what are some of those beautiful strengths of the collectivist psychologies, and what are some of the concerning qualities of the individualistic? Now, I'm going to just quickly preface by saying, for our kind of listeners, that might sound almost like a no-brainer, because I think our listeners think they identify with the collectivist. Although, as you said earlier, it's often very, no offense, folks, but it's often very superficial, right? So I'll identify with the collectivist until it doesn't work for me, and then I don't want to do it. So we know lots about why we like the individualistic culture. Could you talk a little bit about how that's going to be a problem for us as we all go forward, and what are some of the beautiful gifts that we might look towards in the collectivist consciousness?
Sure. And I mean, and I would also preface this saying that there are drawbacks in collectivist culture as well, right? There's a lot of like duty and filial piety and like feeling enmeshment in, families, like, and like, so there is some elusive middle ground, and that line is very fluid. But when I think about like just the most obvious thing for me right now, most salient given where we are in this country, is if you look at the nations that are doing the best with COVID, are the ones where they have this collectivist ideal of like, why wouldn't you just wear a mask and do the right thing for society? You know, like in China, Japan, Taiwan, like people wear masks when they have a cold, just because they're like, I don't want to give people my cold, you know? And that's just so simple. But yet the benefits when everyone, you know, adheres to this ideal is that everyone benefits from it. Or just, you know, even other like Western nations that have maybe a less of this rugged individualism, and maybe they are still individualistic in some ways. I'm thinking of like Australia, for example, where they're like, okay, we will trust that science is real and that we can have this, you know, unified idea of what truth is, and we don't need to politicize it. And I think part of this rugged individualism here is that everybody can start this extreme ideas, and if they're charismatic and they're convincing, like they get a platform, and we can't agree on one version of the truth with really anything. And that is just one place to start. You know, how can we fix the problems that we have when we can't even agree on what the problems are?
Yeah. Wow. You know, you just gave me an insight that I had never really seen quite so clearly. You know, I was maybe was I can't remember. I was saying this to someone else. It wasn't you. I was talking about how in Canada growing up, it's more of a collectivist culture, right? We have a lot of social values and what people would call socialism. And one of my examples was we don't have the same cult of personality here. So when an individual becomes more and more famous as a Canadian, they're either going to be brought down to size by mainstream Canada because we don't think anyone should think they're that special. I mean, you can be special, but there's no superstars. If you want to be like that, go to the US. And what I want to say, I think I heard you say, is that because individualists idealize the individual, ironically, if a charismatic individual shows up, they will actually give their power to that individual more quickly than a collectivist would. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, look at Alex Jones in InfoWars, right? Like, you know, his whole platform is based on things that he like makes up. And I mean, I don't know, maybe there's a more rigorous procedure to that I don't know about, but from the outside, it seems like he makes stuff up.
So knowing that we've hit our time, but we can just steal a few more minutes from the community discussion time. What are some of the most important things, you know, given a platform where, you know, today maybe we have about 55 people listening, but over the week, maybe 100, maybe 200, maybe thousands are going to hear this. Are there no pressure? You know, what would you share broadly as what's really in your heart and on your mind about some of your greatest concerns that you would like people to be aware of as we begin the journey of racial dialogue and community healing? And so, you know, what's the hard work to be warned about? What's some of the traps not to fall into? And then is there anything that really gives you hope?
Yeah. Say first and foremost, stay curious. As soon as we say, oh, this is good, this is bad, as soon as we make a judgment about anything, whether it's something within ourselves, something within our family, or, you know, greater context, we lose the nuance and we lose the growth. So staying curious, I mean, that's not an excuse for things that are like obviously like vitriolic, but like for a lot of these concepts, we are so quick to say like, oh, that's not me, or that's bad, or, you know, we lose the curiosity too quickly, so we aren't able to gain the learnings from it. And then notice the defensiveness that shows up in us, the times that we are like very like, you know, have that sense of repulsion or disgust, that or like, you know, desire to distance from something. That is typically a defense, and there's so much that we can learn from that experience. That's not to say that ultimately we wouldn't still say like, okay, that's not for me, or like, I want to live my life by a different set of values, but growing curious about what it is that triggered that revulsion within us. And how do we work with that? You know, how do we stay curious about it long enough that we can develop some nuance, because ultimately, no matter what you identify with, and whether it's, white supremacy culture or collectivism or whatever, or politically, like, we are all living with the same unified shared sense of existential fear. We are afraid of our safety and our existence being canceled or robbed or taken from us. And people, for some it's like freedom or liberties, and others it's like, living wage and safety as I drive my car. But it's the same type of existential fear that fuels all of this. And I think if we're able to see that, then we're able to tap into the humanity of this a bit more. And I think what gives me hope is, all of this movement towards amplifying, like, voices, Black voices, BIPOC voices in this movement of giving credit and power to the people who have the lived experience of this. Like staying curious and people really tuning in and wanting to do the work, because the way that things are going is becoming more clear that it's not sustainable.
Well, yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. And something that I think that you're highlighting indirectly is that I think there's kind of a white delusion that mending the racial schisms in this country will mean eventually that everyone can participate in the white supremacy. And I think there's a failure to realize that if we're going to create a future literally all together for everyone, everyone's going to lose something.
Yeah.
Everyone's going to gain something. And it won't look like what we've got. But my God, how amazing to think that it could reflect the best of all of us. That's an extraordinary hope. That's the hope. You're not the worst of all of us.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I'd love to have another hour with you, but we've run out of time. I'm so grateful you were willing to do this. Sorry for the glitch at the beginning.
Oh, no worries.
Anything you want to say before we say goodbye?
Be more than kind. Be an ally. Be an advocate. Be an upstander. Sometimes that means interrupting bias. It means putting your own reputation and your own comfort on the line in order to do what's best for society, what's right, align to your values, and be more than kind.
Be more than kind. I love it. Well, I'm going to take a moment now to thank the group and do the announcements to close. You've been generous with your time. If you need to go, I know you have a family. You're welcome to wave and hang up.
Okay, yeah.
You're also,
I do have to go. But thank you so much for having me. And yeah, this was great. And I'd love to engage more with you and the community as a whole. So.
Well, I'm going to encourage everyone to follow you on Instagram and TikTok and to send you their questions and listen to your videos. They're fantastic.
Yeah, I love engaging with my followers. I think this is a kind of a grassroots way of like starting these conversations, and hopefully it trickles out. So
cool.
All right. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much. So thank you one and all for being here with us. I hope you enjoyed that. I know we tried to cram a lot in a short time, and the reality is they're actually all pretty big themes, easy to say, hard to fully appreciate and understand. Before we wrap up in just a couple minutes and then open up the community dialogue, some reminders. First of all, Community Connections at 11 a.m. and 7 p.m. on Thursdays is back up and running. Go to our website for the login details. This Friday, we start the Spiritual Integration 6-week program that I'm running. We hope to have as many of you as possible. It's going to be great with lots of practical stuff and daily experiences for you to explore, including a weekly live meeting. Elise Lasco on the 27th is doing another live distant energy healing session. February 3rd, Mariposa's Diversity Dialogue continues. Your donations are more important than ever as we face, continuing with the renovation of our building. the insurance bills that come up in January annually. We have stayed strong as a community, but we can't do it without you. So thank you. Thank you in advance for whatever you have given and whatever you give. On that note, I'm going to invite you to close with me by catching your breath. I would like to read the Martin Luther King quotation again and then offer a simple prayer. So at the end of that, Susan will begin letting people into the conversation room. We don't have as much time now, but that's okay. I think it's good we got to be with our guest speaker. So a big breath. Let your eyes close. And bring yourself to a place of quietness. Perhaps a hand on your heart, a hand on your belly. As the words of the great Martin Luther King echo throughout time and throughout our loving awareness. The limitation of riots, moral questions aside, is that they cannot win, and their participants know it. Hence, rioting is not revolutionary, but reactionary, because it invites defeat. It evolves an emotional catharsis, but it must be followed by a sense of futility. And so we must develop and maintain the capacity to forgive. We who are devoid of power to forgive are devoid of the power to love. There is some good in the worst of us and some evil in the best of us. When we discover this, we are less prone to hate our enemies. I believe that unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final word in reality. That is why temporary defeat is stronger than evil triumphant. It is from this place and with a deep connection to our own hearts and the hearts of one and all that we pray together as one for a transformation of self and society. To the one that is all, bless us with the opening of hearts and minds, with the curiosity that inspires creativity and new ways of being together that are healing, respectful, restorative, and seek to release all that no longer serves us in a deep listening to the spirit of life that flows through us all. May we each, all and everywhere, be nourished, be safe, be blessed, be loved, and feel connected to the oneness that we all come from, our source, our spirit, and the boundless, endless, infinite love and wisdom that we all carry within. For all these things, for a peaceful transition of power in this country, for graceful and rapid healing of our communities, and a quick end to that which we know is the COVID crisis, we pray together. We lift all prayers and together surrender it to the highest good. Thy will be done. Amen. All right, folks. We're finished with our primary gathering for the day. If you'd like to hang around for just a few Q&A and some chat, you can log in. Susan's sharing that meeting ID. And if you're done, well, off you go. And hopefully we'll see you in class this week or on next Sunday, where we have an incredible guest speaker, Bill Plotkin, really a pioneer in new consciousness and new psychology, Don't miss it. He is quite a rare talent, and I look forward to sharing more with you about him throughout the week. All right, folks, who wants to chat?